Today, we're journeying way back in time, long before the golden age of Athens and Sparta, to the ancient Aegean Sea. This place was a cradle of civilization, home to two of Europe's earliest and most fascinating cultures. And their rivalry? Well, it would shape history.
So, who were these trailblazers? That's the big question for us today. We're going to unpack the stories of two rival powers who shaped the ancient world in completely different ways, really setting the stage for everything we think of as ancient Greece.
And here's the heart of our story, right here. On one side, you have the Minoans, peaceful, super successful traders living on an island paradise. And on the other, the Mycenaeans, fierce, ambitious warriors from the Greek mainland. We're talking two civilizations with two totally different playbooks for survival and power.
Okay, let's start with the first true civilization to pop up in Europe, the Minoans. Their story is unlike pretty much any other in the ancient world, and it all kicks off on this big island right in the middle of the Aegean.
So let's get the basics down. They were based on the island of Crete, and they thrived for more than 500 years. But the key thing to remember is this: the Minoans hold the incredible title of being Europe's very first civilization. This wasn't just a bunch of villages. It was a complex, advanced society.
So how did they pull this off? Well, they basically turned their geography into their greatest asset. Being an island surrounded by the sea meant they saw a highway for trade, not a battlefield. This natural barrier protected them from constant invasions, so instead of spending a ton of money on armies, they focused on business, becoming master traders of wine, oil, and beautiful crafts all across the Mediterranean.
And all this peace and prosperity led to a society that was, frankly, way ahead of its time. We see evidence of social equality, where even the poor lived in pretty large, comfortable homes. Women were treated more fairly than in a lot of other ancient cultures. And get this, people had leisure time. Think about that. Time for fun, not just a constant struggle for survival.
I mean, once your basic needs are met, you can start to have some fun, right? The Minoans got really into sports, not just boxing, but this incredible wild spectacle of bull jumping, a super dangerous and athletic event performed by both young men and women. That tells you everything you need to know about their confidence and their vibrant culture.
And you can see that confidence in the way they built their cities. The famous palace at Knossos was this massive, sprawling complex with over 1,000 rooms, but it had zero defensive walls. They just didn't think they needed them. Their security was the sea, which let them build these beautiful open structures that were all about culture and commerce, not about being a fortress.
But while the Minoans were thriving in their peaceful bubble, a totally new power was rising on the Greek mainland. And these guys had a very, very different view of the world. It's time to meet the Mycenaeans.
And you just can't get more different than this. The number one feature of any Mycenaean city was its gigantic, fortified stone walls. You see, where the Minoans saw a sea of opportunity, the Mycenaeans saw a land full of threats. The rugged mainland was a recipe for conflict. So for them, defense wasn't a nice-to-have, it was the absolute foundation of their entire world. Their legacy is just so important. They were located on mainland Greece, and they were the first people to actually speak the Greek language. And, maybe more famously, their kings, their warriors, and their constant wars became the raw material for all those epic myths that would later define ancient Greece.
You can see their whole story right here on this timeline. They show up in Greece around 2000 BC, but they really hit their stride and become the dominant power around 1450 BC. And remember that date, it's going to be important. Their time at the top, though, was pretty short-lived. The whole civilization comes crashing down in a mysterious and violent end around 1200 BC.
Now, don't get me wrong, they weren't just warriors. Like the Minoans, they were also really ambitious traders, sailing as far as Mesopotamia, maybe even Scandinavia. But here's the key difference. Their trade was always backed up by military muscle. They were merchants, sure, but they were also mercenaries for hire, a powerful and pretty dangerous combo.
So, we have a peaceful island nation and a rising mainland military power. You can probably guess where this is headed. This brings us to the moment their two worlds finally collided: the conquest of Crete. Remember that date I told you to keep in mind? 1450 BC. This is the year everything changed. After 5 centuries of peace and prosperity, the Minoan civilization was conquered by the Mycenaeans. It was a massive power shift in the Aegean.
So this raises a really interesting question. How did they last for so long only to be defeated? Well, while the Mycenaean invasion was the final nail in the coffin, a lot of historians think the Minoans were already in trouble. There might have been a massive volcanic eruption or a devastating tsunami that wrecked their navy and their farms, leaving them wide open for an attack.
But what's really fascinating is what happened after the conquest. The Mycenaeans didn't just burn everything to the ground. They were actually so impressed by Minoan culture that they adopted huge parts of it: their art, their writing, their fashion. In a weird way, the conquerors were totally captivated by the people they conquered.
So while the Minoans left behind a legacy of peace and innovation, the warlike Mycenaeans achieved a completely different kind of immortality. Their legacy wasn't about quiet achievement. It was about loud, epic, unforgettable stories.
Their stories were passed down for hundreds of years through this incredibly powerful medium, the epic poem. You'd have these bards who would memorize and recite these long, dramatic tales of heroic deeds and legendary adventures, keeping the memory of the Mycenaean kings and warriors alive. Then, around 800 BC, a poet we know as Homer was the first person to actually write these stories down. His two incredible works, the Iliad and the Odyssey, would basically cement the Mycenaean heroes and their legendary wars in history forever. And of course, the most famous of these stories is the Trojan War. The legend is just incredible. A kidnapped queen, a 10-year siege led by King Agamemnon of Mycenae himself, and of course the legendary trick of the Trojan horse that finally brought the whole city of Troy down. This is the Mycenaean world completely transformed into myth.
So you might be wondering, how much of this stuff is actually true? Well, while these stories were definitely based on real Mycenaean kings and their very real wars, they got embellished a lot over time. Think of it like this. Their actual history became that 30% of reality that served as the foundation for the 70% of mythic inspiration that has captivated the world ever since.
Okay, so let's bring it all together one last time. The Minoans, they were all about peace and trade. The Mycenaeans, war and conquest. You can see it in their architecture. Open, unfortified palaces versus huge walled fortresses. And their legacies are just as different. One is remembered as Europe's first great peaceful civilization, the other as the violent, heroic foundation for Greece's greatest myths. And this leaves us with one final thought. We have these two powerful legacies, one born from peace and prosperity, the other from conflict and legendary heroes. It kind of makes you wonder, which of those paths echoes louder in our world today? Is it the quiet builders or the celebrated warriors? Something to think about.